Hello, and welcome to Overthinking Eurovision. I'm Matt Rather. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Geez, are we going to have another Eurovision overshadowed by the war in Ukraine? But if you're sick of the war, think about how the Ukrainians feel about it. Nobody is more sick of the war than they are. Just a reminder, this is the song they sent to Eurovision the year before they were invaded. They would love to send another incredibly stupid, fun song like that just as soon as Vladimir Putin gets the hell out of their country. And until that happens, we strongly feel that they have every right to use Eurovision to tell their story. Whatever happens in Liverpool, we hope next year's Eurovision finds you guys at peace. Ukraine made its Eurovision debut in 2003 and immediately showed a Sweden-like aptitude for this thing. They placed in the top 10 8 times over the next 12 years, winning once and coming in second twice. But in 2014, Russia invaded and annexed the Crimean Peninsula. And that September, the Ukrainian broadcaster NTCU announced it would not be participating in Eurovision the following year. According to a representative, now was not the time to engage in entertainment of this kind, and the money that would have to be spent on the Ukrainian national selection for Eurovision 2015 would be better spent on more important needs. It made total sense, but within the next year, 2 things would become clear. First, Ukraine was not going to win this war of attrition without significant international support, both in direct aid and in political pressure against Russia. Secondly, Eurovision could be the way it got this support. In 2016, Jamala's song 1944 put Ukraine's struggles against aggression on the front page of newspapers around the world. And when Jamala won, and the next contest was held in Kyiv, Ukraine got a lavish stage to appeal to the international community.
We are proud to welcome you to Ukraine, and we hope you will love it as much as we do.
If you didn't watch our video from last year on the ways that Eurovision gets political, check that out. It's got a whole section about the 2016 contest and features a Photoshop of Joe Nye, the political science guy, that we spent way too much time on. Anyway, Ukraine missed the competition again in 2019 for very different reasons. This time they wanted to send an artist as an act of cultural diplomacy, but they couldn't find a singer who was willing to be a cultural diplomat. According to the BBC, the winner of Vidbeer that year felt the terms of the contract the government insisted she sign, quote, would have made her a mouthpiece for propaganda. The second and third place acts opted out too, but a spokesperson for the broadcaster was unapologetic. The song contest is an opportunity for every country to announce itself in the international arena, and for each performer to act as an ambassador. In other words, Ukraine felt like Eurovision was only worth spending wartime resources on if it can be effective PR. And given the remarkable outpouring of support that Kalush Orchestra received, this strategy has paid off.
Everybody is in peace in this arena. Everybody wants peace.
By the way, Eurovision isn't the only international competition that Ukraine has used this way. Here's the outfit that Miss Ukraine wore at the 2023 Miss Universe pageant in January. According to her Instagram page, Victoria has a weapon in her hands, and at the same time, she carries light through the darkness that came to our peaceful lands with the aggressor. Guys, would it be disrespectful to point out that this kind of looks like Mercy from Overwatch? Forget I said anything. And that brings us to this year's Ukrainian national selection show, Vidbeer 2023. The competitors all understood that this was about a lot more than music. Whoever won was going to spend the next 6 months giving interview after interview about the plight of their country and its desperate need for international aid. It's not a surprise Ukraine was the first nation to pick a song. The winner was going to have some work to do. This year's Vidbir musical director was Dmytro Shurov, a songwriter and composer who did the theme music to the comedy series Servant of the People, starring this weird-looking dude. Fun fact, you might have known that Volodymyr Zelensky was an actor before he was a politician, but did you know that Time Magazine's Man of the Year provided the voice of Paddington Bear in the Ukrainian dub of the movie? If you imagine everything Zelensky says coming out of Paddington, that makes it way more badass.
Наступая, вы будете видеть наши лица. Не наши спины, наши лица.
Anyway, musical director Shurov had the job of narrowing down 400 submissions to a more manageable number for public voting. And somewhat controversially, he announced that he was prioritizing entries that did not have the folk music influences of Ukraine's previous selections, Stefania and Shum. Nearly half of the entries are an imitation of that sound, and in my opinion, Ukraine can give the world other stories, other emotions, a new sound. We get what you're saying, Shurov. You're sick of Ihor Didenchuk, the flute player who was featured in both Kalush Orchestra and Go A. And considering Go A was supposed to be the act in 2020 as well, that makes it 3 years in a row that Didenchuk was picked to represent Ukraine. He played the flute, he really cute, his Eurovision domination is absolute. But you gotta give someone else a chance, Didenchuk. This year, Vidbir was held in an actual underground bomb shelter due to the risk of a Russian missile attack. And unsurprisingly, almost all the songs were about the war in some way. There was When God Shut the Door by Jerry Hale.
When God shut the door, I fell on the floor. I don't want war, but you know sure.
Jerry also participated in Vidbir 2020, where she finished 6th with a very different song.
I bet your body wouldn't get it. Why am I sitting eating carrots? It's 'cause you're vegan.
She doesn't eat meat. She eats veggies and, well, mainly just veggies. We know a lot of the Eurovision fans were rooting for Jerry this year, but we just couldn't take When God Shut the Door seriously after we realized it sounded a lot like the Diva song from The Fifth Element. Lilu Dallas Multipass. Then there was Krut, a folk singer who plucked out a wartime lullaby on her bandura.
Sweet, sweet, sweet. God береже степи.
Now, normally the problem with instrumentalists is that being stuck in a chair with your hands busy really limits what you can do with the staging. But Krut gets around that by handing off the bandura to this cute kid halfway through. That frees her for the big finish. But hold on, Eurovision rules say you have to be at least 16 at the time of the contest to participate. So unless this kid is actually a high schooler with a pituitary gland disorder, the staging would have to be changed for Liverpool. Maybe she could have used some kind of puppet of a child, something artsy like Warhorse. But we'll never know because Krut finished a narrow second place to the electronic music duo Tvorchi and their song Heart of Steel.
Get out of my way, yes, I got a heart of steel.
These guys met in 2017 when they were both pharmacology students at Ternopil National Medical University. If not for that chance encounter, they both might be selling blister packs of azithromycin at whatever the Ukrainian version of Walgreens is. When they first participated in Vidbir back in 2020, Ternopil National Medical University issued a press release about Tvorchi, talking up how much they love pharmacology. It even revealed that one of them wrote his thesis on pharmagnostic study of stevia, like the sweetener you'd put in your tea or something. Neat. Can we see who his advisor was? Uh-oh, moving on. Looking at Dvorchi's back catalog, these guys don't seem like an obvious fit for Eurovision. Eurovision tends to favor a maximalist aesthetic. Here's Ukraine's song from 2018. Dvorchi's music is what I would describe as minimalist cool. The arrangements are often just a simple drum loop and one synthesizer.
Don't listen what they say, they fancy when they pay.
Even their Vidbir song from 2020 felt kind of stripped down to bare bones. Compare that with another electronic music act, the Crystal Method, competing in last year's American Song Contest. Heart of Steel doesn't go as hard as that, but it does go harder than we've heard from the band in the past. There's a lot more layering to their sound.
Don't get what you say.
With a little reworking, this could totally work in a stadium. And, music aside, the live performance of Heart of Steel featured some pretty slick choreography. The performers interacted with graphics on a quartet of screens. It reminded us of Man Zemmerlo's performance with the gnome from 2015. The same gnome that punched me in the face. So, you are not a special effect.
You tell me.
My lawyer hasn't given up on trying to extradite that guy. And I haven't given up on trying to regrow my hair. Hey, maybe these pharmacologists can help me. After Dvorchi's win, Krut, the second-place finisher, accused the funky pharmacists of breaking the rules by pre-recording some of the vocals for a doubling effect. The contest organizers later admitted that, yes, this was against the rules, but it wasn't a big enough issue to do anything radical, like throwing out the results. Still, it's pretty inspiring that even in the face of war, the people of Ukraine found a way to maintain their traditions, like trying to disqualify the winner of Vidbir. Now, as we discussed earlier, this song is more than a piece of art. It's a propaganda tool in Ukraine's existential struggle, and there are a few unique aspects of Heart of Steel that should make it very useful for PR purposes. First, although this song was inspired by the heroic defense of the Azovstal steel plant, the band has said that it's also about the looming specter of nuclear war. The graphics in the live performance make that pretty clear. According to Dvorchi, today, while some are playing with nuclear threats, our people with steel hearts are protecting all of Europe. And he's right about the nuclear threats, by the way. Putin has repeatedly talked about it. So what Heart of Steel does, that none of the other Vidbir songs do, is move away from a simple humanitarian appeal, pivoting to an 80-year-old taboo against atomic warfare. Now, there are a lot of politicians carrying water for Vladimir Putin by arguing that both sides of the conflict are basically the same. But it's hard to do that when only one side is publicly threatening to send a radioactive fallout cloud floating across Europe. Secondly, Jimo Augustus Kehinde, aka Jeffrey, was born in Nigeria. Why does this matter? Well, Russian propaganda around the war centers on the false claim that the Ukrainian government is secretly filled with Nazis. And Russians absolutely love killing Nazis. Russians are like, I came here to drink vodka and kill Nazis, and I'm all out of vodka. Note, we're kidding about Russia being all out of vodka. They will never be all out of vodka. Now, we all know that this claim is false, and not just because President Zelensky is Jewish, but let's assume for a minute that some people out there honestly believe that Ukraine is dominated by a neo-Nazi ideology. What better way of blunting that particular attack than sending an African immigrant to represent you? Also, these guys are media trained and politically astute. We found an interview they did on Polish television back in May 2022, and they were already talking like ambassadors.
On Sunday, you'll be thanking Poles together for their support. Is that support felt in Ukraine?
We are all big family on this planet, and we are all united, and this can't motivate. You agree with me, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget now because Kalush Orchestra was quoted in every English-speaking news outlet, but those guys didn't really speak English. All those interviews had to go through a translator.
Я дуже сильно вам дякую від всієї України.
We want to say a big thank you to everyone who voted for us.
The members of Tvorchi, on the other hand, speak English better than me speaky. If their mission now is charming Western reporters, that's going to be a big help. Finally, this song has a much more international sound than we've heard from Ukraine since the war began. It's in English, and it doesn't feature any native instruments or harmonization. Just based on the way it sounds, Heart of Steel could have come from a lot of different countries. But maybe at a time when Ukraine is desperately trying to get into the EU, presenting itself as globalized can't hurt. Consider the case of Yugoslavia in 1989. With the nation facing existential political and economic threats, they sent Rock Me, which featured a Western pop sound and a chorus with as much English as the language rules would let them get away with. This became the nation's only Eurovision win. And when Riva gave their victory performance at the end of the show, lead singer Emilia Kokic sang the lyrics entirely in English.
Come on, feel the sound, rock me, baby. Hardly touch the ground.
It was almost like saying, we're one of you guys now, so please have our backs. And that might be a message that Ukraine is trying to embrace as well. So, Tvorchi has a long road from Kyiv to Liverpool ahead of them, but they are ready to represent their country with heart, style, and... Didenchuk, what are you doing? Get out of Heart of Steel. You don't get to go to Eurovision this year. I'm sorry, man. Oh my God, he's in the studio with me. He's growing more powerful. I'm locking us down before it's too late. Don't worry about me, I'll make it to the extraction point. Send a team in before... Oh my God, he's broken containment. I repeat, Didenchuk is outside the barrier. We have a code blue and yellow, people. A code blue and yellow. If Didenchuk keeps spreading at this rate, he'll be a part of every Eurovision 2023 song in 72 hours. 1 week from today, he will retroactively become a member of ABBA. Are we in trouble? Indeed.